as a soldier, we were trained to combat enemies. We were not trained to walk into a bloodbath massacre and see people that had been killed in the most gruesome of ways, and it's your own people in your own land. October 7th, I woke up in my grandparents' home near Netanya. Around 7 in the morning, my mother wakes me up with tears in her eyes to the images that the world was starting to wake up to. I immediately start packing my bags. I get a message from my commander that I'm being called back. I drove as fast as I could. By 4 p.m., we were already driving from our base towards Kfar. We were there fighting for about 2.5, 3 days in Kfar, saving the Jews that were still there and also non-Jews. And we were able to finish the job of securing the border and making sure Hamas was under control in our land. And then from there, we were deployed into Gaza and later into Lebanon and later into Syria.
Rudy Rochman has become one of the most recognizable pro-Israel voices online, not because he avoids conflict, but because he walks directly into it. Recently, millions of people watched Rudy sit in the middle of a room surrounded by 20 anti-Israel activists in one of the most viral debates online. But Rudy didn't stop there. He's also walked alone into anti-Israel encampments after October 7th. He's challenged both the far left and influential voices on the right, like Tucker Carlson. And unlike most people discussing this war, Rudy didn't just debate it online. He physically entered Gaza during the war. But what makes Rudy different is that he doesn't only speak about politics, he speaks about identity, civilization, psychology, the Jewish story, and why he believes the world fundamentally misunderstands this conflict. Rudy, thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Now, you just sat in the middle of a room surrounded by 20 anti-Israel activists, like I mentioned in one of the most viral debates online. Before you walked in, what were you expecting, and what were your thoughts afterwards?
So I'd like to first say that I appreciate you make the distinction of them being anti-Israel activists and not pro-Palestinian, because being pro-Palestinian is someone who wants the benefit of the Palestinian people. But if someone only selects instances of Palestinian suffering only when it fits an agenda to use that against Israel, that's not pro-Palestinian. That is just anti-Israel. They don't talk about the thousands of Palestinians that died in the Syrian civil war, the hundreds of thousands of Palestinians still in refugee camps in Jordan and Lebanon. They don't talk about those suffering under Hamas, the Palestinian Authority. They only care to talk about Palestinian struggles, which do exist, but of course taken out of context. So that is absolutely someone that is an anti-Israel individual, although I wouldn't necessarily ever say that every person there was. Most people were. What I expected going into this there would be a diversity. I spoke with Jubilee beforehand and told them, listen, put as many extreme activists, individuals, loud voices as possible. I will debate them, but at least maybe include a few people that are a little bit more open-minded, and we can talk about transcending the conflict and finding solutions. Unfortunately, there weren't any of them inside that were willing to do that. There was one that had more of a person experience in the land, that grew up in the land, so I felt he was more open-minded, and we had a part 2 conversation that went a little bit better than the part 1 because we had more time to express one another. But unfortunately, there weren't individuals there that were already on the level of being able to engage, of talking about a future reality where both are included.
Mhm. Was there a point where you were shocked during the debate? Anything that really surprised you?
I wouldn't say there's anything that surprised me because I've been in these conversations for many years. So all the different claims that they threw out are ones that I've heard for over 15 years now doing this work. But yeah, it's a different structure than what I usually do, because usually I have the time. We can engage, I can let them get out what they want, and then we can start to engage. Here, they throw out 20 different points, and while I'm starting to respond to some of them, also have to try to create rapport and human relation and understanding of who we are, and at the same time, everyone throwing up flags to try to get me off from being able to speak. They only throw up the flags mostly when I'm speaking to cut me off. So it's a little bit different of a setting, but we have to bring light wherever there's darkness and do our best in any situation we're in.
Did you feel that there was a conflict just because you're representing Israel, or did you feel like you were hated as a Jew? Because we speak about anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism, and a lot of times we say that anti-Zionism is a cover for anti-Semitism. Did you feel that at all?
Yeah, anti-Zionism is a form of being anti the Jewish people. I gave an example in the Jubilee talk. If you think of what is the individual that's the most anti-Semitic person, most people would think Hitler. Hitler wanted to completely exterminate the Jewish population, tried to do so, killed 6 million Jews, millions of other peoples as well. But there are other ways of being anti-Semitic. If Nazis believed that Jews should just be kicked out but not killed, that would also be anti-Semitic. If other Nazis believed Jews don't have to be kicked out, but they should be subjected to being lower class or having second rights, that would also be a form of being anti-Semitic. So there's different ways of hating and having a prejudice against the collective of the Jewish people. And one of those ways is to be against their right to self-determination. The same way if someone was against the civil rights for Black people or indigenous land rights to Native Americans in their reservations, that would be a form of being anti that group of people. So if someone is against the right for the Jewish people to self-determine, that is a form of being anti-Semitic. And yeah, it's not about my personal views. Their opposition to me was because I'm a strong, proud Israeli Jew who's not afraid to say what needs to be said. And they only want to accept Jews who are okay with being against their own collective. Those are the Jews that are kosher to them. And unfortunately, those are the only Jews that they've mostly had correspondence with, which is why it's important for us to stand up and have those conversations.
Did you feel like you were debating people with actual opinions or debating social media narratives, things that are going on or, online, false narratives about Israel?
I would say mostly the latter. A lot of the things were just regurgitated talking points and they weren't interested in having a conversation. It was more, let me get this line out so I can clip up the video and have a video of me saying this thing to this person. But again, I think most conversations with polarized individuals, even on the Israeli side, when we engage with Palestinians, would likely just regurgitate information that they've heard on their side. And in order to break through, you have to be able to have this willingness to engage, which only comes from experience or can come after, 20, 30 minutes into the conversation. And the person in front of you that has never engaged with something on the other side all of a sudden realize, wait a minute, this is a real human being that has valid opinions and isn't against me. Now I'm a little bit more open minded to asking questions and responding one thing at a time rather than just throwing 100 things at once in order to try to win the argument.
Mhm. One thing that I think people notice is that you stayed really calm. I think that's probably the way you are generally. Is it how do you stay that way when you're in a room with so much tension?
I would say it's both nature and nurture. I've always been a calm and collected individual, but I also understand the situation that I'm in that moment. Whenever I'm in one of these situations where I'm being attacked verbally or ideologically from all sides, I think about, okay, in 50 years from now, when I'm going to look back at this moment, what would I tell myself I should have done? Is it just to reflect and mirror the negative energy of them projecting the traumas that exist inside of them against us and doing the same thing back to them? Or is it to try to heal the situation? And there is an ability for me to change someone's perspective in one conversation. It doesn't always happen in one conversation, but even those that takes far more, sometimes you're planting seeds and it will take time in order for those ideas to flourish, to germinate and to grow and to yield fruits from those conversations. So I always look at it as less I'm here to fight, I'm here to heal. I'm here to help transcend. I'm here to help connect to the truth that they hold on to because they do have truths within their argument and to extend my truth from their truth in order for us to have a more holistic understanding on the situation and truly the objective of moving forward.
You also walked into an anti-Israel encampment after October 7th. Why did you do that? And did you have any fear? Take us through that.
Yeah, so during the time when the war was at its peak, there were a lot of encampments on university campuses across the country. I've been actively speaking across college campuses long before the war. I had been invited to GW in DC to speak for the Chabad there. And during the day, I decided to go check out the encampment. Again, my goal is always to be a light where there's darkness. There's a lot of darkness, a lot of things being said about Israel and the Jewish people there. Who's going to go there for us if we don't go out there and bring light to that situation. So I started having a conversation with a Jewish student who was under the impression that the Jews all of a sudden just popped out of nowhere in the Soviet Union regions. And then I explained to him, no, actually, we originate from Israel, and the experiences that we had externally are just a process of our displacement, which he had never really heard and understood. And you can see the wheels turning inside of him. And from there, one of the organizers realized that this was what was happening and decided to call the entire mob against me. And in this video, you see hundreds of people shouting, yelling, foaming from the mouth, spitting. They brought a loudspeaker, putting it to my ear to try to silence or intimidate me. Now, usually I can have conversations and I'm strong. I'm not in any way showing weakness in front of those in front of me, but I'm also not trying to aggravate them or to show them that I'm against them. But in this moment, I have no ability, no, sorry. In this moment, I didn't have any ability to speak. I didn't have any ability to communicate, to use my skills in elevating conversation and transcending those barriers. I'm silent. I can't say anything. Nobody would even hear what I have to say. So all I could think about in this moment is, let me look into every single one of their eyes as much as I can and have them remember what a fearless Jew that had full emunah looks like. And that's all I could think about. And one at a time, I spent a few seconds there, a few seconds there, looking into their eyes. And none of them touched me. None of them really approached me more than just screaming from a distance. And eventually, when I walked past after 20 minutes to leave, there were these two older, I would say in their later 30s or 40s, Palestinian individuals who wanted to have a real conversation with me. And they asked, hey, let's go to a nearby street and have a real conversation. And as I walked, it was almost like the sea was splitting. Every single person moved to the side. And this is not a superpower that I have. This is a superpower that every Jew has. When you have full emunah in Hashem, full belief in the oneness, the creator above us, and you have zero fear, you have a superpower cheat code that will protect you against any person who comes against you.
We're still seeing protests even nowadays, not on college campuses, but we saw it recently in New York outside the synagogue. They walked through the Jewish neighborhood. So, according to what you're saying, Jewish people should not hide from it. They should confront it. What do you recommend should be done on?
So it comes to the question also as to why is this happening and how could we address it? And the more macro question of why this is happening, if we try to explain why are we constantly hated and blamed for all problems, it's a very unique issue that the Jewish people face because every extreme agrees only on one thing, and that the Jews are the problem. The far right thinks for the left, the far left thinks for the right. Capitalist blames us for communism, communist blames us for capitalism. The white supremacist neo-Nazis were enemy number one. The black supremacist Farrakhan's were enemy number one. The extreme of religious groups were enemy number one. The extremes of secular groups were enemy number one. It's very unique to the Jewish people. And that doesn't mean other groups don't have xenophobia as well, but it's usually one opposite group against them. Whereas for us, it's all groups. And so we ask ourselves this question, why? And there's a lot of excuses that Jews have given over the years, success, jealousy. Well, we're hated also when we don't have success and when we're very poor. And there are many other groups in this world, Singapore, or the three most recent immigrant groups that have the most success in America, like Koreans, Indians, and Nigerians, who don't go through the same amount of persecution. Just to give your audience a general picture, in New York City, we are 13% of the population, and over 60% of total hate crimes are targeted against Jews. That doesn't make sense just out of jealousy because no other group that has success experiences anywhere near to the numbers that we go through. The other excuses that is usually given is that we other ourselves, we have our own community centers, or we have some sort of dual loyalty towards the collective of the Jewish people or to the state of Israel. But then you look at other groups like the Amish and Armenians and Muslims and other groups who have their own schools and community centers and cemeteries. They also have a separation. And you look at places like in Miami, where if the FIFA World Cup or the Olympic comes, everyone's cheering for Argentina, Brazil, Haiti, Jamaica, another country other than America. No one is pointing fingers at the Amish or at the Jamaicans for caring about another place or having their separation within society. So again, these are excuses for us to try to justify. And I think that the question is the wrong question, meaning it's not what did we do that caused anti-Semitism, it's what didn't we do. And to understand what we didn't do, we need to remember what we are supposed to do as a collective, which is to do tikkun olam and or lagoim. Tikkun olam means to heal the world. Wherever there's hatred, jealousy, materialism, famine, pollution, we are the nation that chose the responsibility to heal and elevate this world, which, by the way, is not proprietary. Another nation can choose to do that too, and more power to all of us if we had more nations choosing that. But in the meantime, that's what we chose. And the second is to be or lagoim, a light to the nations. So when people are living in darkness, in lack of truth, we are supposed to be the nation that turns on the light, that gives them access to that for them to be their greatest potential. And what we see with all these extremist groups, these extremes are the ones that are suffering the most in society. And their conclusion is that the Jews caused their suffering. But I think what's going on is a subconscious reaction that deep down they know the Jewish people are either responsible to heal them and to fix their problems, or were responsible to prevent it from the beginning. And so anti-Semitism is a reaction to our inaction. And yes, we need to fight anti-Semitism, because if you don't, we die and they will get more emboldened. So we should for sure need to stand up and fight against it. However, fighting anti-Semitism is not the solution to anti-Semitism. The solution to anti-Semitism is for us to stand up, unite, and do our job. And what we see throughout history is that whenever the Jewish people are united, empowered, loving one another, fulfilling their purpose, not assimilating, miracles happen. And whenever the Jewish people are divided, fighting each other, assimilating, doing idolatry, that is when anti-Semitism rises. So it's sort of like we're living in a video game, whereas these other nations are pre-programmed to respond almost as bots, and to act out against us when we need something that is a plan B that brings us back together. Because if we don't come together on our own, then something will be forced to bring us back together. So I feel bad for anti-Semites. It's almost as if they're locked into this character depending on how we act. And I think that's important for Jewish people to understand. Yes, on the micro example of a protest coming to our streets to intimidate Jews, to beat Jews up, stand up, go out, stand up for yourself, fight back, for sure. But on the more macro level is let's do what we need to do so that this is not even a problem to begin with.
Okay. And do you think that most people today even want dialogue? They want debate, or they just want to kind of broadcast their side, and not hear anything from the other side.
Well, people want to be right at the end of the day, and they won't necessarily express their opinions based on what they feel is right, but what I feel can be accepted. This is for the most part, right? Let's say today we can go to a university campus and there might be individuals who are racist or who are sexist, but they probably would not air out those opinions because of the consequences of what would happen in society. The same way that there's freedom of speech, there's freedom of reaction to speech, and society has been conditioned to reacting negatively to racism and sexism, and rightfully so. So I think most people today who are positioning themselves against Israel is really from a lack of understanding of the geopolitical situation, not understanding who the Palestinians are, who the Israelis are, what the situation's like, how we can be able to transcend it, but also feeling this justification to stand against Israel as sort of, this is going to get me a good reputation. This is going to make me a hero amongst my peers. And being against the Jews and the state of Israel is going to elevate myself. And I think whether it's conscious or subconscious, a big part of that plays a role, which is why often when I speak with individuals, I ask them, are you guys Palestinians or are you guys just someone who cares about this conflict? And for me, the difference is a player and a fan. If you're not a Palestinian or you're not an Israeli, you're a fan. You're an external party that might care. Fans do care about teams, but you're not the team. And when it comes to Israelis and Palestinians, we are the people on the ground. So it is our responsibility to be able to transcend. And I notice most Palestinians at some point are willing to have the tough conversations of how to move forward because they have a stake in the game. Whereas others that are fans, and this exists on both sides, people who are pro-Israel, people who are pro-Palestinian, this exists on both sides where their goal really is just to take a position against the other side. And this polarity is beyond just the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. You have the extreme right that at this point doesn't even care about right-wing issues. They just care about being against the left. And you have extreme left that doesn't care anymore about left-wing issues. They just care about being against the right. And it's also the same thing when you look in Israeli politics from right and left to religious and secular. We're living in a world that has forced us to be experiencing the other side so much so as our enemy that we actually completely forgot what our own sides were. And I think the real way to transcend that is to identify the truths that exist in both sides and to bring those things together in order for us to get out of these false boxes that were imposed onto us.
Mhm. What went through your mind, on October 8th when you saw people, romanticizing Hamas, glorifying October 7th? Even before Israel even responded, people were already, happy about what happened. Did it surprise you at all? How did you feel?
I only saw these things, I think, around October 9th or 10th, because from October 7th till the 9th at night, I was in Kfar Aza fighting Hamas, so I wasn't on my phone watching how the world was reacting, but definitely saw it afterwards, and it did not surprise me. What surprised me is that it took longer than I would have expected for the world to turn on the Jewish people. And we see this equation happening throughout time, that whenever the Jews are divided, which we extremely are, and even more so were prior to October 7th, with the judicial reform, with the right and the left, and the religious and the secular, extreme division to the point that on Yom Kippur, the holiest day to the Jewish people, in Tel Aviv, Jews were fist fighting one another. In addition to that, extreme assimilation, where in America you have 5.4 million Jews, the largest population of Jews outside of Israel, and you have between 60 to 80% assimilation rates, depending on the studies and the polls that you look into. And other places like Brazil and Argentina, it's even higher. So extreme assimilation, extreme self-fighting from within, that is the formula for anti-Semitism to rise. So I was not surprised to see the world turn on us. And the same way that they're turning on us in a sort of, supernatural, metaphysical way that is unexplainable, the world will turn for us the moment that we plug in the opposite variables, which is unity amongst the people and fulfilling our objective of our actual mission.
I didn't realize you were in Kfar Aza on October 7th, and the days after that. Could you take us through that? What was it like? What did you see? How did you feel?
Sure. It was a very tough experience, obviously. As a soldier, we were trained to combat enemies. We were not trained to walk into a bloodbath massacre and see people that had been killed in the most gruesome of ways, and it's your own people in your own land. So none of us were really prepared for that situation from a psychological place, but we were prepared in a physical combat place. October 7th, I woke up in my grandparents' home near Netanya. We were getting ready to pray at the synagogue. My cousin was supposed to get married that week, so my grandfather had sponsored the kiddush for the shul. It was Simchat Torah, it was Sukkot, it was Shabbat, all in one. And around 7 in the morning, my mother wakes me up with tears in her eyes to the images that the world was starting to wake up to. I immediately start packing my bags. I get a message from my commander that I'm being called back. I drove as fast as I could to my apartment in Jerusalem, packed my military stuff, checked in the base, and by 4 p.m., we were already driving from our base towards Kfar Aza. We didn't know where we were going, and we didn't know what we were about to see. We had seen some videos, but we didn't know the extent of it at that moment. And so the moment we passed a police checkpoint, that's where we started to see, I don't need to be explicit, but many, many people who were killed in the worst ways possible. And we were there fighting for about 2.5, 3 days in Kfar Aza, saving also the Jews that were still there and also non-Jews. There were some workers from the Philippines and Nepal, others that were there as well. And Baruch Hashem, we were able to finish the job of securing the border and making sure Hamas was under control in our land. And then from there, we were deployed into Gaza and later into Lebanon and later into Syria. And so I've been in and out of the physical combat for a few years now, and ideological combat as well.
Wow. Wow. So, you've debated activists, like we mentioned. You entered hostile protests, like you mentioned, and you physically served in Gaza. What disconnect between the online world and reality shocks you the most?
I would say that the first thing that comes to mind when you say that, and it is a disconnect that exists on both sides, is the lack of understanding that there's no future without the other. Meaning there's no reality where all Palestinians or all Israelis will disappear. So this idea that we need to be completely against all Palestinians, all of Islam, or all of Arabs, or completely against all Jews, all Israelis, all Zionists, these zero-sum game narratives, I think, is what fuels the continuation of the conflict. Because I always tell people, what are the options that we have in front of us? One population is going to exterminate the other. Obviously, that's not going to happen. One population is going to completely remove the other. Obviously, that's not going to happen either. We continue the status quo, which we've been doing for 80 years now, or we try to build something that works for both. And that's something that's very difficult for people to think of because we naturally see each other's aspirations as contradictory towards achieving the aspirations of the other. And if you look at what Palestinians require, it's freedom from the river to the sea, meaning equality as they live in this land, or whatever state, whatever structure exists, they should have equality in that land. And right of return, which would not mean necessarily all Palestinians would return, but all Palestinians should have a right to return. Right? The Jews have a right of return, but not all the Jews are returning. However, the 5.4 million Jews in America, if you told them that tomorrow they cannot return, even though they did not have the intention to return, they would all have a problem with it. So what causes a problem with our non-negotiables, which is full control economically, politically, culturally, and militarily over the land? Jerusalem is our capital and third temple built. Those are non-negotiables on our side. There's a conflict where we currently are, which is that the right of return would no longer have a Jewish majority, or that Jewish majority would be too small of a majority to really maintain a Jewish state. And the other problem besides demographics is also culture, that you would be bringing in a lot of people who, many of them, not all of them, but many of them, some can even say most, are not okay with Israel existing to begin with and are even anti-Israel. So if we're at A and we want to get to G, we can't just jump from A to G. We have to go through B, C, D, E, F in order to get to G. And in order to deal with the demographic problem, I think we should do what we should have done a long time ago, not even connected to this problem, is bring back the tribes of Israel. Today, the Jewish population, we are 16 million around the world, descendants of 2.5 tribes, Judah, Benjamin, and half of Levi. And we'd be far more if 6 million hadn't been killed in the Holocaust. We'd be far more if 1 million hadn't been killed and forcibly converted in the Inquisition. We'd be far more if we weren't assimilating to such rates that we are today. But today we're 16 million. But there's 9.5 tribes that have yet to come back to the Jewish people, for which today their descendants are about 500 million. Most of them were converted to Christianity and Islam. So of that 500 million physical descent population, you have about 20% who still identify as part of the family of Israel. And I would say about half of them who want to make Aliyah. So we're talking about an additional 100 million Israelites who identify as being parts of Israel, some religious, some not, just like our side of the family. And about half of them, I would say roughly 20 to 50 million, who want to make Aliyah and move to Israel. And if we were to facilitate the bringing back of our brothers and sisters, because they're our brothers and sisters, it happens to solve the demographic issue of not having enough Jews to maintain a Jewish state and a democracy at the same time. Although I don't like the democratic system that we have, the parliamentary style, British style government that focuses on short-term objectives rather than long-term vision, and on division rather than unity. I think we need to build a whole new system. But I do believe in a form of a republic where people have the right to vote for their leaders and the different policies that are enacted. And in order to maintain a republic, you have to maintain a majority Jewish population, which can be done if we did the right things of bringing back the tribes of Israel, and would solve that problem. Now, it still doesn't solve the cultural problem. Whereas, okay, yeah, you have the majority, but you still have a lot of people here who hate you. And in order to break free from the current situation that we're in, we have to look at other conflicts throughout history. The Chinese and the Japanese that hated each other for hundreds of years, the British and the Vikings, the Germans and the French, the Germans and the Jews that killed 6 million Jews, and 10 years later, the same civilization is supporting the state of Israel. So if you change the foundation of the experience that different populations go through, you can change the way that the culture views the other population. So right now, Palestinians are being told the reason why they suffer is because Israel exists. And the way to end that suffering and to achieve their aspirations is by destroying Israel, since according to them, Israel's existence is what causes it. So them being anti-Israel or anti the Jews is a means to an end to get to what they want. Now, if Israel acted more like King David in the land and not like King Saul, meaning not a king who is weak against his enemies and doesn't care about the other minorities, but one that is strong both with destroying all the enemies of Israel from Hamas, Hezbollah, Houthis. There should not be one member that exists still as a part of this movement. But at the same extreme strength, you have an extreme compassion in changing the relationship that the population has to the states, to the country, to the power that exists. One where the country creates freedom of speech. Palestinians do not have freedom of speech. If they say something that in any way talks about the future where Israelis and Jews and Palestinians and Muslims can live together, that translates into them either being tortured or them disappearing from this world for good. So there is no freedom of speech, which Israel should enforce and create for all. There is no investment in infrastructure, in resources, in recycling plants, in desalination, water technology, in education. And if Israel had more of a responsibility to really provide everything that it could to create a better life for those people, the relationship those people would have is, well, you can't manipulate me that Israel's the source of all of my problems when it's actually taking care of me like it is taking care of everyone else. And simultaneously creating freedom of speech, which would allow other voices to exist outside just the hateful ones, and also being extremely strong against the hateful ones that this is not something that will be tolerated. If you go to Dubai, it used to be that if you steal something, you get your hand chopped off. If you go to Singapore and you bring drugs, there's a death penalty. I'm not saying we need to be as extreme as that, but no one is stealing in Dubai and no one is bringing drugs into Singapore. So there needs to be consequences for terrorism, which there isn't enough. We need to be much stronger, but we also need to be much stronger on our compassion and our desire to transcend the situation. And unfortunately, where we are currently with Israel, we're doing neither.
Now, like we mentioned, you've seen this war up close. You've seen the bodies. You've seen the aftermath of October 7th. But it still seems that you have a lot of empathy, a lot of compassion. How do you still hold on to that when others might be spiteful or angered or revengeful? It seems like you chose empathy. You chose compassion. How, can you explain that to me?
For sure. So, first of all, I understand what the role of our people is to begin with. If our role is to heal the world and empower other nations who are living in darkness, how could we not do that with our own cousins in our own homeland? And the conclusion that someone comes that I'm the source of the problem is a metaphysical reaction to us not being the solution, and B is coming from a lack of truth. The person that's growing up in Gaza, that's being raised since a child, that the reason that they suffer, the reason their family members died, the reason that they cannot travel, the reason that all these things are happening is because Israel exists. I understand that the lack of truth, the lack of information has caused them to be in a situation where they're living in so much darkness that they can't even see. And so, if we are the people of light that need to be a light upon the nations, yes, we need to respond and fight Hamas and Hezbollah, which I do firsthand. But at the same time, we need to do what is necessary to get us all out of this, because the real goal and the real mission of Israel is to have humanity transcend all these things that are limiting, fighting one another, and not being all in tune. We need to accept that we're all under one. If one person suffers, we all suffer. And we're so disconnected from that understanding, and we think of ourselves only as in groups, that then you're not able to see the full picture. A body, you have many organs. The organs need to be different. The brain can't pretend to be the intestine, can't pretend to be the brain, can't pretend to be the skin, but together all a part of one body. If it forgot that it was one, then it would tear each other apart. So we should be different, but we're all still part of one. It's a two idea thing that sometimes people care more about, oh, we're a part of one, but they forget that they're their own individual as well, or people think that they're only their individual and forget that they're part of one collective. And both things are true. This is the duality that keeps pulling us apart, that we have to recognize the truth within both and bring them together, which is the Magen David, the balance between the spiritual and the physical, the balance between to the sky, to Shamayim, and to the physical, to the ground. We are the nation that's supposed to bring back that balance.
Beautiful. What did you see inside Gaza that people online completely misunderstand? What stayed with you? Anything you care to share?
So I could only speak about my personal experiences because there's a wide range of different experiences, but everything that I saw Israel do was to limit the amount of casualties that exist, from leaflets that we saw, from warning people, from making sure that areas were completely evacuated before going in. A lot of people don't realize that the destruction to a lot of homes happened because a lot of them were booby trapped. A lot of them were prepared for soldiers to come in to destroy. And once Israel was able to pick up on how they symboled those houses. They used to have like a red carpet on one or a purple shirt outside of another window, and that's how they would signal to each other that there was a house that was booby trapped. So once Israel picked up on that, they destroyed those homes. There were tunnels in some of those homes. So people look at the outcome of the situation, but don't include any of the context that got us into the situation to begin with. Also, Hamas forces as many civilians as possible to be in the line of fire, not only to increase the amount of Israelis they're killing, but to increase the amount of Palestinians that die in order to use the number of Palestinian deaths and the horrible images that everyone has seen that is very real of civilians dying as a way to create an ammunition against Israel and the Jewish people. So that would be, what I experienced. I also saw plenty of propaganda. I came out with 3 suitcases filled with Hamas propaganda, educating the youth that the Jews are the source of the problem. That's something that a lot of people don't know about. But again, I look at it as we didn't have to wait for October 7th to know that this is what was going on. We all knew that Hamas was doing this, that it was preparing tunnels, that it was preparing weapons. So we have to have also a little bit of accountability on ourselves. Why did we wait till then to do something about it? Why do we have to wait for that many Jews and also non-Jews that died on October 7th to be taken and killed for us to respond and to take initiative on our matters? And that's a little bit harder of a conversation because we need to look in the mirror and realize there is accountability we need to have. Also, in terms of how it approached the situation, I do have my own critiques of things that it could have been done better, but it's very easy to judge after the fact than while you're in it. And so a lot of people think, well, Israel didn't need to do X, Y, Z. And I always offer to anyone that says that, well, what would you have done instead? Given that, of course, you're saying it in hindsight, but what would you have done instead? And usually there's not really an answer. So if you have a critique, be very specific of what that critique is, because your critique is probably a valid part of the conversation that needs to be brought up, not just let me blame everything and demonize Israel and the Jewish people without any context or without any opposition or ideas of how it could have been done better.
Some IDF soldiers mentioned that they found Mein Kampf, Hitler's book, in many houses, a lot of Nazi influence. Did you find that at all?
Yeah, we saw a few Mein Kampfs as well. We saw illustrations that invoke Nazi propaganda, like the Jews being the tentacle octopus that spreads throughout the world. I didn't have a swastika on it, so it wasn't per se specifically a Nazi image, but those images and that use of images has been something that's used by the Nazis. And there was a ton of propaganda that showed Jews with fangs and peot and blood sucking, and the solution is to kill someone, and glorifying the terrorists who went and killed Israelis, not just soldiers, but civilians. So that is something that exists in many places, unfortunately, in Gaza and in homes. But it's important to note that it's not every single house, and it's not every single person that believes in that. There are many Gazans who do not want to see a future where Israelis are being killed, who do not have those ideas. And those that do have those ideas, it's not something that they were born with. It's not something that they just came up with. It's something that's been intentionally indoctrinated to this population. And us that see the bigger picture with all these moving pieces, we need to not fall into the same trap of saying, oh, well, they're all bad, because that's exactly what Hamas is doing. All the Jews are bad. All the Zionists are bad. All the Israelis are bad. And although we have a lot of pain, it's important for us not to become like the enemy that we're fighting.
Mhm. I believe that you said the following quote: "The greatest victory for Hamas would be turning Jews into Hamas." Could you explain that to me?
It's not exactly what I said, but close.
Okay.
And it is definitely what I was just speaking about, which is Hamas can kill many Jews, and for them that's a success. But I think their greatest success of destroying the Jewish people or hurting the Jewish people is turning Jews to becoming just like them, and turning Jews to be just as hateful and vengeful, losing their humanity, seeing all peoples as their enemy. You destroyed their soul. You might have kept their body, they might be alive, but you darkened who they are, and you removed us off of the path of what we need to do. And in fact, you take on the opposite energy of who the people of Israel are. The people of Israel are the people who are supposed to help elevate to this world, not to become the same victims than the ones that are fighting us.
Mhm. Do you think October 7th psychologically changed Jews around the world?
Similar to the Holocaust, it changed the perception of a lot of people. We can say pre-Holocaust, most of the Orthodox world rejected the idea of Jewish self-determination, at least right now. and most of the Orthodox world changed their perspective and accepted it. A lot of the Jewish world, right and left, religious and secular, united together after the Holocaust. Same thing with October 7th. Many Jews came together. That being said, we don't need to wait for Plan B to bring the Jewish people back together. And Plan B is a horrible act of suffering that we go through. And that act of suffering is only something that holds on short term. It's not something that can hold long term. The only thing that is Plan A and holds on the long term is a collective vision and mission that unites us all. And we had that from 48 to 67. It was called Zionism. The goal was to come back to Zion, to come back to Jerusalem. And since we came back and liberated Jerusalem, which we saw many miracles happen throughout, we did not have a conversation of what's the next step. What's the next vision that unites the Jewish people from the right to the left, religious to secular? And because we don't have that, we then revert to fighting each other. And then all of a sudden, a plan B, a major attack comes, and that brings us back together, but only for a short period of time. So this is not something that can, on the long term, unite us. And we do need to find that next chapter of Jewish history, which I think has a lot to do with understanding the purpose that Israel has to do to the rest of the world.
Now we have critics like Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens, more and more critics of Israel. But at what point does criticism of Israel cross into obsession with Jews? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I wouldn't say what they're doing is criticism, specifically Candace and Tucker. First, I'd say that I don't know one Israeli that doesn't criticize the Israeli government. There's not one Israeli out there that I have ever met or heard of that doesn't have issues with something that the government is doing. So criticism is not anti-Semitism. It's more that their anti-Semitism is not criticism. And them trying to demonize the Jewish people to make us as if we are inhuman or monsters, them trying to delegitimize the Jewish people, whether it's our connection to the land or our very identity, or making us seem as foreigners and not people who are from this land, or fake Jews and all these claims that exist, or holding a double standard and saying, I care about Palestinians only when it comes to the conflict with Israel, or I care about genocides and conflicts and people dying only when I can talk about Israel and the Jewish people, then you're not someone who truly cares about elevating the conversation or about talking about the issues that they claim to speak about. They care about making sure that the world turns against Israel and the Jewish people. And that's the concept of anti-Semitism. So yeah, I wouldn't say that what they're doing is criticizing. I would say what they're doing is trying to shift pop culture to coming to the conclusion that they must attack and go against the Jewish people. But I think there's also metaphysical things that are happening. We learn from Jewish scripture, from texts, that during the plagues, God sends 10 plagues to Pharaoh to release the Jewish people. And he says that after a few plagues, Pharaoh would have actually released the Jewish people. And that Hashem, God, hardens the heart of Pharaoh to make sure that he hates the Jewish people even more beyond his free will, in order to not let the Jewish people go, in order for the Jewish people to see the plagues hit the Egyptians and for them to be detached from the psychological, spiritual slavery that they were in, thinking the Egyptians were gods and thinking they needed to put their heads down and be weak. And so in a way, I look at the Candaces and the Tuckers who are just, almost like as if they're drones that are being hardened by a higher power to be used to galvanize and to activate something within the Jewish people.
Why do you think that the younger generations now are increasingly drawn more towards the Palestinian narrative, Palestinian cause? And why do you think that the anti-Israel narrative dominates, TikTok, Instagram, social media?
Yeah, I think it goes back to the world and all of its extremes coming to the same conclusions that the Jews and Israel are the source of the problem. And that if we look at this pro-Palestinian movement that exists in pop culture today, it is not one that cares about Palestinians outside of the context of Israel. And so it is not really a pro-Palestinian movement. For the most part, it is an anti-Israel movement. And why is it so popular? Well, the same way it's been so popular across many different countries, nations, regardless of the economic status of the Jewish people. When we're up and when we're down, we're always seen as the source of the problem. And it comes from the fact that it's not because we created the problem, but we are supposed to be the solution. And they don't hate us because they ain't us. They hate us because we ain't us. That is the issue.
Many people may say that Israel doesn't do a good job at PR. There has to do a better job. But from what you're saying, it seems like the solution is more spiritual, and it doesn't have to do with PR.
Both things can be true. We also happen to be bad at PR because the way we communicate is we say what sounds good to us. So, for example, the past 15, 20 years on college campuses, most of the Israel or Jewish groups on college campuses would do events only in the Jewish safe spaces, in the Hillels and the Chabads. And we would talk about very shallow things that make westernized Jews feel proud about Israel, like we created the cherry tomatoes, ways, drip irrigation. We're the only democracy in the Middle East. We're the only Jewish country in the world. Well, yes, Japan is the only Japanese country in the world. So, like, what's the point? We're saying things that sound nice to our ears, but we're not understanding the fundamental question, which is who are the Jewish people and why does Israel have a right to exist? And we're never engaging in the conversation on a national or international level, only in an internal level, and we're not building coalitions. So there's definitely a lot of PR that we could do, but again, the issues that we're in is not just because of our bad PR, which is also true. It's because it's a reaction to our inaction, which is, yes, a spiritual equation that's going on, but it takes very practical and real world work that we need to do in order to get us out of this situation.
You often say that Judaism is not merely a religion, but a civilization. Why is that distinction so important?
I would actually say it's not a religion at all. And a lot of Jews, when they hear that, they might be triggered because we were raised our entire lives saying Judaism is our religion. But we also need to understand what we mean by that is this is our identity, our culture, our spirituality, our language, our Torah, our purpose, our experiences, everything combined into one, which we're using the word religion to kind of encompass all of that. But the word religion is not a Jewish word, it is an English word, and it is defined as the belief system in a God, deity, book, or prophet. So, by the very definition, if one does not believe in the God, deity, book, or prophet, they're not a part of that religion. But you and I both know that if a Jew does not believe in Torah and Hashem, although a fundamental part of who we are, they're still a Jew. But when you look at all other religions, if you do not believe in the God, deity, book, or prophet, you're not a part of that religion. A Christian that rejects Jesus is not a Christian. A Muhammad that rejects Muhammad is not a Muslim. A Buddhist that rejects the philosophies of Buddha is not a Buddhist. You have to be a part of that belief system to be a part of it. And it's not a people, it's an ideology that crosses over borders and nations, where you can have a Nigerian Christian, an Argentinian Christian, and a Chinese Christian. They're not the same peoples. They're only a part of this collective because in that very moment, those individuals believe in the same ideology. And that word religion is what defines this concept. And it is not the concept that relates to who the Jewish people are. Now, do we have a spirituality? Of course. But so do indigenous peoples all around the world, from the Aztecs to the Mayans to the Aboriginal to the Maoris to the Native Americans, Native Canadians. They also have very core spiritual beliefs, and no one calls their culture religion. So, where does this come from? During the time of Napoleon, the Jews were finally said to have equal rights. And Napoleon asked a very interesting question. He asked, are you guys French Jews or are you guys Jews living in France? And he wanted to see, are you first another nation living here or are you part of our nation that has a secondary religion? And I'm not here to judge, but the Jews gave him the wrong answer. And we said we are French Jews, that Judaism is our religion. And understandably so, they said it in order to gain equal rights, which only existed for a short period of time before it was quickly taken away. But it is wrong. We are not French people that have a Jewish religion. We're not Americans that have a Jewish religion. We're not Moroccans or Yemenites or Russians or Polish or German with a Jewish religion. We are Israelites that are temporarily displaced from our homeland. Now, while we live in those other societies, it is part of our culture to elevate those societies, to respect law and order, to help the countries that we live in, definitely not to be against them. But we need to be honest that we are an ancient civilization, and being a Jew, an Israelite, or a Hebrew are all different synonyms talking about that same civilization. We only have one loyalty and one home, and that is Israel, and that doesn't mean we're against anybody else. But we need to be also honest of who we are.
I saw a story that a few years back you were, I think, arrested in Africa, right? Could you take me through that story and what happened over there?
Sure. So for the past few years, we've been working on a project called We Were Never Lost, a documentary series to bring back the stories of the dispersed of Israel, also known as the lost tribes, and bringing them back to the consciousness of our time in order to bridge back those gaps and to reunite the greater family of Israel. While we went to Nigeria, which was one of the more dangerous countries on our list, at the time the government was very anti the Jewish communities there, actually blaming them for similar things that we're blamed for. You guys control the media, you guys run all the businesses, you guys are the lawyers and the doctors, and you own the real estate. Same things that the Jewish people face everywhere that they go. And because we came to film a documentary on a population that the government at the time deemed to be a sort of enemy, we then suffered the consequences of being treated the way many of them are treated over there. We were kidnapped. There was never any formal process. There was never any arrest. There was nothing we were guilty for. We were kidnapped at gunpoint. 15 armed gunmen with black ski masks pulled us away, threw us in a prison cage for 3 weeks. The first week without food. The next 2 weeks after that first week with one meal a day, and in the very disgusting conditions, full of rat feces and human urine on the floors, and and just living in filth. And then the last 2 weeks, we were with two Boko Haram terrorists, which is ISIS of Nigeria, in the cage with them. And so it definitely was a very difficult period of time, but there were nonstop miracles that happened to us throughout. We knew that eventually we would make it out of there. We believed, and thankfully we did. And later we were able to make it back to Nigeria to finish the filming after the government had changed. So this is not to give an impression of Nigeria as a whole or all Nigerians or all governments at all times. This happened to us at that time with that government.
So I guess having that experience, you kind of deeply empathized with the hostages in Hamas in a Hamas captivity, right?
Yeah, I mean, each experience is different. Some people who went through almost 2 years of being captive is different than my 3 weeks. So it's not in any way to compare or say that we went through identical situations. But yeah, I understand what it's like to have your freedom taken away from you, to not be able to do anything that you want to do, and to not know when you're getting out. I think that's the hardest thing, because if you know in a week it's over, then at least let me pull through. But I don't know if the world is still even doing anything to get us out, or if they even know. And I don't know when I'm getting out, if it's going to be a matter of weeks, months, years. That's I think the hardest thing.
Okay. What gives you hope right now for the Jewish people, for the land of Israel? What are you hopeful for?
I'm hopeful for us to activate our potential. And I think there are also very clear equations in the Torah that explain to us how to do so. It says in Tanakh that in the times of Mashiach, the tribes of Israel reunite from the four corners of the earth. And so that is an inverse equation. The answer is Mashiach, this reality where humanity transcends. You must bring back the tribes of Israel. And so bring back the tribes of Israel and you can get there, which makes sense, because if I took a glass vase and I dropped it on the floor and it shattered into many pieces, and I wanted to pull it back together to be a vessel that can hold water again, I'd have to bring back all the pieces. If even one piece is missing, water is going to leak out. Now, most of the pieces are not even yet back for us to be able to even create the structure. We brought Ashkenazi Jews, Sephardi, Mizrahi, half the Ethiopians, some Bnei Menashe, and the Bukharian Jews, but the majority of the Israelites are still missing. So what I'm excited about is this next chapter of Jewish history, that we are the last generation having been born not knowing who they are, and starting the process to bring back all the pieces of Israel for us to be the full vessel that we need to be. And so I'm very hopeful for that, and excited that Hashem activates that next chapter as soon as possible. And of course, it's a give and take. We need to do, Hashem needs to do, it's both of us together. And I think it's our role now to step up to the plate and to do it.
Rudy Rochman, thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for what you do for the Jewish people, the country of Israel. How can people find you, follow you, and learn more about you and the projects that you're doing?
Well, most important, I think, for the Jewish people, we need to follow Hashem. And for the non-Jewish listeners, the 7 laws of Noach, only 7 laws for humanity to follow. If people want to find my specific social media pages or where I make videos, on any and every social media platform, from Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, X, it's under my name, Rudy Rochman, or under Instagram, it's Rudy_Israel. Israel is my Hebrew name. So if you type that in on Google, you'll be able to find it. And I create content to try to empower people and elevate the public discourse for us to transcend.
Amazing. Thank you again. Wishing you all the best.
Thank you
Lots of
so much.
הצלחה.
Toda rabah.
If you have a 401k or an IRA, please listen. Gold is at record highs. What many people don't know is this: you can move part of your retirement money legally and without tax penalties into physical gold you actually own. Alpha Omega Gold helps you do this through a gold IRA. Your gold is real. It is stored safely. It is in your name. Learn more at ao.gold/stand. Alpha Omega Gold is our sponsor, and they proudly stand with Israel.